Isabella Grant looked like any other teenage girl, quiet, respectful, her demeanor composed, her movements modest. She clutched a first-class boarding pass with fingers that trembled slightly despite her steady posture. Traveling alone for the first time, she was dressed in a simple cardigan over a clean white blouse, hair in a neat bun, blue backpack snug on her lap. There was nothing about her that screamed for attention. That, perhaps, was part of the problem. From the moment the lead flight attendant laid eyes on her, something shifted in the air. Marla Jensen, a seasoned airline professional with glacial poise and a rigid sense of authority, noticed Isabella before she even spoke. With her platinum blonde hair pulled into a tight bun and her uniform impeccably pressed, Marla gave off the kind of polished presence that made passengers sit straighter and think twice before asking for a second drink. But with Isabella, she didn't bother with pleasantries. "Sweetheart," Marla said coolly as she reached out for Isabella's ticket. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" Isabella blinked up at her, startled. "Yes, ma'am. This is seat 3A." Marla barely glanced at the boarding pass. "This is first class," she said, her voice dipped in condescension, a carefully crafted smile plastered over a deeply rooted judgment. Her tone didn't need to say the rest, but it was loud enough people like you don't belong here. The cabin, already humming with polite conversation, grew a notch quieter. No one said anything outright, but glances were exchanged. Subtle ones, calculated ones, the kind that assessed, dissected, and decided everything in 3 seconds flat. Isabella remained calm. She had earned this ticket. It was a gift from her mentor, a teacher who had seen her potential and wanted her to see the world beyond the borders of their neighborhood. She was on her way to a national science conference where her project had won first prize. A scholarship had taken her this far. It hadn't occurred to her she'd have to defend her right to sit in a chair she'd been assigned. "I'm sure this is my seat," Isabella said, offering the ticket again. Marla took it this time, scrutinized it in a way that went far beyond standard protocol. "Well," she said after a pause that dragged long enough for tension to rise like steam, "let's see if this checks out." She walked off with the boarding pass, heels clicking against the aisle with a sharp staccato, and disappeared behind the galley curtain. Isabella sat frozen, afraid to even lean back in her seat. A man, too, rose up, looked over, then quickly turned back to his newspaper. When Marla returned, her expression was unreadable. She handed the ticket back with a quick, "It's valid," and turned on her heel. "No es paligui. No es mal." Isabella exhaled silently and folded her hands in her lap. The rest of the boarding process went on without further disruption, but the moment lingered like a bad scent. Flight attendants offered champagne and hot towels to the other passengers. None came to Isabella. Even when the meal cart rolled through the cabin, she was skipped the first time around. When she politely raised a hand, the other attendant, a younger brunette named Fiona, frowned slightly. "We were told you declined the meal service," Fiona said. "I didn't," Isabella replied softly. Fiona hesitated. "Oh, I'll see what's left." She returned 10 minutes later with a foil-wrapped sandwich, not the plated meal everyone else had received. Isabella thanked her anyway and peeled the wrapper carefully, trying not to make a mess. Across the aisle, a woman in her 50s, smartly dressed in a navy pantsuit, leaned over. "You know," she whispered, "you handled that with more grace than I would have." Isabella gave a small smile, but said nothing. The plane took off. Altitude climbed. Conversations resumed. But the unspoken ripple of that first interaction had not entirely disappeared. Marla, for her part, seemed to avoid Isabella entirely for the rest of the flight. But the damage had been done. Somewhere over the Midwest, a passenger in two-band older black man with silver-framed glasses and the composed confidence of a seasoned executive opened his laptop and began typing. He had noticed the entire thing from start to finish. And while he had seen such behavior countless times in boardrooms and airports, watching it unfold in the confined space of a luxury cabin made something stir within him. His name was Dr. Langston Ward. He was a tenured professor of behavioral ethics, traveling to keynote a conference on implicit bias in leadership systems. What had just unfolded in front of him was textbook discrimination disguised as professional discretion. He wasn't one to let such things pass unaddressed. After landing, while passengers stretched and waited to deboard, Langston Ward caught Fiona's eye. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "Is there a comment card for this flight?" Fiona blinked. "A comment card? Or an email I can use to give formal feedback? It concerns your lead flight attendant's treatment of a young passenger in 3A. Fiona's mouth twitched. She hesitated, then stepped away and returned with a small form. He accepted it, thanked her, and filled it out with swift, meticulous care. Elsewhere, Isabella collected her backpack, stood, and filed into the aisle like the rest. She moved quietly, head held high, eyes forward. But as she stepped off the plane, a voice called out, "Miss Grant." She turned. It was Dr. Ward. "You handled yourself with incredible dignity," he said. "If you don't mind, I'd like to write a letter on your behalf. Not just to the airline, but to the board organizing the conference you're attending." Isabella looked surprised. "I didn't want to cause trouble." "Sometimes," he said gently, "you don't have to. Sometimes, the trouble reveals itself." She gave him a small, grateful nod. Within 72 hours, a public apology was issued by the airline. Not because Isabella had demanded it, but because the letter Dr. Ward sent along with statement from 3 other first-class passengers who had witnessed the incident was so precise, so calm, and so undeniable in its language that the airline's legal team didn't want to fight. They wanted a resolution. Marla Jensen was quietly reassigned, pending further review. Fiona received a commendation for stepping in and providing what little she could. And Isabella's story began to spread not as a moment of anger, but as a portrait of quiet courage. By the time she stepped onto the stage at the National Science Conference a week later, her name had already made the rounds. Not because of the conflict, but because she had stayed composed through it. Because, in a cabin full of people who had power, privilege, and presence, it was the youngest, most underestimated among them who reminded everyone what dignity looks like. She didn't mention the flight in her speech. Not directly, but when she closed her remarks, she said this. "Sometimes, where you sit isn't about the seat number. It's about what you carry with you. And if you carry truth, you already belong anywhere." The room erupted in applause, not just for her research, but for who she had proven herself to be.